All right, so today we are going to discuss, excuse me, a short history of Simón Bolivar, also known as El Liberator de Latinoamérica. To begin with, we have to, of course, start at the very beginning of his life. He was born on the 24th of July in 1783. So this is shortly after the American Revolution and all of the North American events in U.S. history, where U.S. history truly begins. He would die on December 17th, 1830, so he would live a decent, not terribly long life, but not a short life either. Throughout his life, he would be many things. He would be husband, of course, son. Do not think he was ever a father. I'm not 100% sure, but nothing that I've read. He would eventually become the leader of what is modern Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, Panama, Peru, and Venezuela. So he became a leader of a large number of modern countries, though at that time they were just under mostly one country called Gran Colombia. Now, to move on to his early life. He was born in Caracas, which is now in Venezuela. He was the fourth child of Juan Vicente Bolivar y Ponte and Maria de la Concepcion Palacios y Blanco. So, few kids, and of course you have your wonderful, long Hispanic name or Latin names. Sometimes difficult to say, but absolutely lovely to hear. He was born as Simón Bolivar, but when he was baptized, he became Simón José Antonio de la Santísima Trinidad Bolivar Palacios Ponte y Blanco. So again, given that wonderful Latin name. The first Bolivar, to go back a little of Bolivar family history, was the first one to come to America, was also known as Simón Bolivar, so he was named after his ancient ancestor who came into America around the 1580s. So they had been there around 200 years. And he was not someone of terrible wealth, though he had some family wealth to him. But by 1783, the Bolivars were one of the wealthiest families in Latin America and had incredible wealth and prestige to their name. Though not prestige doesn't always give you a wonderful life, though it does give you many privileges. A British historian named John Lynch, he described Bolivar's youth as both privileged and deprived. And this is because he had financial family privilege, but his family would go through a lot of problems, one of which being both his parents passing away. And he would therefore be moved around a lot, and that caused some of his kind of the early problems in his life. His father died in 1786 of tuberculosis. This was a very common illness that took out many people. Bolivar himself actually died in 1830 of tuberculosis, though I'm getting ahead of myself. He was raised away from his siblings after his father died, and he was actually raised away from his mother as well. She would live somewhere else. His siblings would all be partitioned off to different people, and they would be their protectors until they came of age. His older siblings were married off, and they lived their own lives. He was actually raised by a woman named Hippolyta. She was a slave, and he considered her actually his mother and his father. She kind of combined both roles for him, and she was probably the one that he would look to the most since he was very young when both of his parents passed away. Because his father, again, passed away in 1786, and his mother would pass away in 1792 of tuberculosis as well. So he was 3 years old when his father died, and about 9 years old when his mother died. He was not very interested in education. He was more of a child of action. He liked to, I guess, do what most young boys like to do: run, play, fight, do all the normal things. So he was considered kind of a troublesome wild child, but nothing that would be too difficult to overcome in his later years, though he would spend most of his life fighting. So I guess he was becoming suited for it. In 1793, so after 1 year, he was enrolled in a rudimentary primary school by his protector. But 2 years later, he would run away to his sister's house, trying to get away from schooling and this man and everything. But he was not successful. He was returned to his protector, and after years of struggle, he was sent to Madrid for study because he could not get control of everything, and his protector just couldn't control him anymore. So he just moved him on. There, a man named Geronimo Enrique de Utzaris y Tovar was told to educate him in the classics, literature, and social studies. So this is where he would get some of his classical education, and this was when he would start learning about the Enlightenment that was starting to impact most of Europe at this time. Around 1800, while he was in Spain, Bolivar fell out with the royal crown. He was in the royal circles at this time, but he fell out with them because he was wearing diamonds without being given royal permission. So he was kind of a rebel to begin with. And because of his kind of social exiling, he actually traveled most of Europe and would go around, especially in Paris and other places in Spain and Italy. Around the same time, he would meet Maria Teresa Rodriguez del Toro y Alesa. This would be his future wife. And when they did get married, shortly after their meeting, she was 21 and he was 18. And they were married in 26th of May in 1802. And unfortunately, she would also pass away a few months later of yellow fever this time. So not tuberculosis. So this would be 3 major deaths in his life that would heavily impact who he was. Because of her death and their very short marriage, he swore to never remarry, and he actually told someone later in his life that this was a commitment that he had made, though it would not stop him from procuring a few different lovers throughout his life. But he would never marry, and therefore I don't think he couldn't have any legitimate children. But again, I'm not sure if he had any illegitimate children. After his wife's death, he traveled to Spain because they moved to Caracas for a while. She then died there, and he moved back to Spain. He went there partly to comfort his father-in-law because of the loss of his daughter, but he also traveled around and just took that time to, I guess, refine himself. And when he was in Paris, he went to different salons, which was the general place to be. And just for a little side story, modern listeners hear the word salon, especially if you're in America, and we think of like hair salons. That's really the only place I ever hear of this word being used. But back in the day, a salon was a place for kind of thinking and reading and discussing different events. So one of the major things a salon could do was you could have coffee, or there would be other forms of drink depending on where you are. London, coffee was very popular for a long time. Paris was more about wine and stuff. And you would read and discuss all the different life events and everything going on in the world. And this is where things like the Enlightenment became very popular. People would discuss political philosophy and other forms of kind of popular philosophy at that time. So while he was in Paris after his wife's death, he met many like-minded men and women in these salons, and this is where it is believed some of his early revolutionary ideals would come from. In 1805, Bolivar and some of his new friends toured Italy. And on 18th of August, 1805, Bolivar swore to end the Spanish rule in Latin America. So seeing the ancient history of Rome, and especially seeing some of the historical monuments that were left behind after like the plebeian revolt against the rulers and stuff, he kind of was moved to make this declaration that it was time to end Spain's control in Latin America and for Latin America to become a independent and thriving place. So that kind of ends his early life and brings us into his military career, which would be the majority of his life. He would go from basically at this point in his early adulthood, basically all the way up to almost the end of his life being a military leader or just in the military. He wasn't always a leader, of course. Because of Francisco de Miranda's attempted revolution, Bolivar desired to return to Venezuela. So again, he is in Europe. He is tired of all the stuff going on. He then hears about this revolt that was again led by Miranda, and he now is ready to go back and fight for his countrymen. Unfortunately, it took him about 6 months and a short meander through the United States before he reached his homeland. So he had to take an American ship because of all the international conflicts between Spain, England, America, and all that type of stuff. I think 1807 is very close to when the War of 1812 is. You have the end of Napoleon's kind of interactions across Europe. So it was not easy for him to get a ship. So he boarded a ship. He jumped over to the United States, where he would travel to Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., some other places for a few months. And then he eventually jumped on another ship and went back to Venezuela. Now, in 1807, Bolivar started meeting with other elites about independence. So in Venezuela, there were, like all places, two different minds going on. Some people wanted independence. Some people did not want independence. So those who wanted independence would eventually being called the republics, the Republicans. Those that did not want independence and wanted to remain under the Spanish crown were called royalists. So he would start meeting with the Republicans about how they're going to pursue independence. And what was able to kind of propagate all of this was Napoleon's replacement of the Spanish crown. So again, the French invaded Spain, and he put up his brother as the king of Spain. Many of the elites did not care for this, whether they actually wanted independence or not. They would not serve a French royal crown. They were still loyal to the Spanish crown. So they were willing to set up a temporary government of their own with the hope that the Spanish crown would return, though the Republicans were hoping that it would remain independent. Their work was met with resistance. Many went to prison because of their acts. Many signed some political documents that were considered treasonous, so they went to prison. I'm not sure if some of them, were beheaded or not. I'm sure some were. Bolivar escaped due to the fact that he actually did not sign most of these documents. He was elsewhere. He agreed with them, but he did not sign them. And so he was not imprisoned. He was not, taken care of. But he was asked by friends of his to kind of move aside and maybe not be so publicly opinionated, keep it in the shadows for a little bit. By 1811, talk was mixed between remaining with Spain or becoming independent. So again, there's still this turmoil going on that Bolivar is all mixed up with. He wants Venezuelan independence. He wants to be away from Spain, but he has to, of course, get support. He has to have an entire military that can back him up. So these mixed feelings would end by July 5th of 1811, and Congress would declare complete Venezuelan independence. This would be the first Republic of Venezuela, and it would be very short-lived, but it would be a monumental step towards their end goals. Within a week, the Republic had to raise an army to fight Spanish loyalists, and Francisco Rodriguez del Toro became the commander of their forces. So this is kind of similar to using American history. The colonists, they kind of removed themselves from England. They signed the Declaration. They said, we're done. We're going to become our own nation. And this is when George Washington would become commander of the Continental Army. So very similar thing. The Venezuelans, they declared independence. Then Del Toro became the commander-in-chief of their army. Though he did not last as long as George Washington did, because he was replaced by a man named Miranda. We talked about him a second ago. And he and Bolivar did not have a great relationship. Bolivar and Del Toro did, but not Miranda. So Miranda actually stripped Bolivar of any command, and Bolivar had to continue fighting as more of a regular than as a commander. By November of 1811, the Republic was failing to win the war, and then a huge catastrophe hit, and it was an absolute travesty. An earthquake hit Venezuela and just wiped out the country. Just a massive devastation. It almost completely destroyed Caracas, and many Venezuelans had to take that time to go and try and save people. Bolivar was one of them. He rushed into Caracas. He tried to save people when he could. He tried to bury people when he couldn't save them. Just being a decent human being, really. But between the failing war and that earthquake, Venezuela, the Republic, just couldn't stand anymore. It didn't help that many people believed that this was a divine retribution from God for them leaving Spain. They thought God was punishing them, and that it was a just complete, religious problem. So the war wasn't fully over, though it was ending. As Miranda, he was retreating east, and he ordered Bolivar to assume command of Puerto Cabello and its fortress. So this was a fortress by the ocean. It had a large portion of the prisoners of war, and it had a large portion of ammunition and other military, guns and everything. So he was told to go command it, and while there, unfortunately, under his command, a traitor released the soldiers that were in prison, gave them weapons and ammunition, and on June 30th of 1812, they were able to take the fort, turn the guns, and start firing at Puerto Cabello. And though Bolivar put up a good fight, he fought until the 6th of July. He would not be able to take it. Then Miranda surrendered to the Royalists on July 25th of 1812, thus ending the war. But Bolivar was able to escape, and he was not captured or imprisoned or anything. And he was able to go to the Free State of Cartagena, if I'm saying that correctly. And he was given a military command there. They wanted to join him and help what was going on, so he was given some soldiers. He was given a post in the lower Magdalena River, and he was only supposed to hold it. He wasn't supposed to do anything else. But while there, he made the Cartagena Manifesto, where he outlined what he believed the Republic's first problems were. He wanted to write down everything to be able to fix the problems of the past. So if they tried again, they would be able to, succeed this time. But he was not just willing to write something on paper and move on. He wanted to continue fighting. So he launched an offensive and took the entire or a large portion of the Magdalena River that was owned by the Royalist forces. This was an important step in his career of going from a commander with not a ton of experience on the offensive, but more on the defensive, and this moved him into a offensive commander who was willing to take chances and take the battle to the Royalists. By February of 1813, Bolivar had joined Manuel de Castillo y Rada and captured the city of Cacada. Again, if I'm saying this correctly. Because of his military actions, Bolivar was promoted to brigadier general, so he was rewarded for his kind of ostentatious offensive. It was a success, and he was rewarded well for it. By May 14th of that year, he launched what is called the Admirable Campaign. He has also issued the decree of war to the death. Now, this is kind of a severe decree, but you kind of have to think about the moment and the emotions going on. And so this decree said that any Spaniard not actively aiding his forces were to be put to death. So either you have to be actively with him or you're fully against him and you got to go. So again, a little severe, but that's what he said. He was proclaimed El Liberator on October 14th of 1813, giving him that very special name. And this is when he had pushed all the royalists out of Caracas and even past that, and then he came back into the city and they called him El Liberator, which is a nickname he had gotten from somewhere else, but this is kind of when it stuck. At this time, he was also named dictator of the Second Republic of Venezuela in 1814, which in this case, dictator is not a negative word. Dictator just means absolute ruler. That's where it comes from in the Latin. And so in this case, they were kind of making it almost like a king type thing, but Venezuela was trying to figure out where they stood between a monarchy and a democracy. Though he was actually only in charge of the western half of Venezuela, because Santiago Marino, who was in charge of the eastern military conflict, he would not give up control of the eastern half, so there was definitely some conflict there. Though it didn't really matter because Venezuela was in deep trouble and the Second Republic would not last very long. They had rebellions from all sides. You had the kind of elites. They were not happy with things. You had the poor who were not happy with things. And one group called the Legion of Hell, they were really not happy with things. They were a group of horsemen that were led by Jose Tomas Boves, and he invaded Venezuela in February, and he took Caracas in July, but by December of 1814, so this whole year they kind of fought this guy, and by December he actually, in the Battle of Boyacá, he would die in battle, kind of ending his invasion, but he caused enough damage to make it very bad for the Republic. So throughout the first half of the next year of 1815, Bolivar dealt with multiple issues. The worst of all the issues was a battle with Del Castillo. He was trying to besiege the city that Castillo was in, and he would eventually, because he kind of got his priorities mixed up, his whole attention was not on the battle or the siege, and he would lose, and he would actually put himself into self-exile, and he would this would lead to some good things, but in essence, the Second Republic fell. So, while he was exiled in Jamaica, he arrived in Kingston in May of 1815, and this was after the fall of the Second Republic. Here, he would write the Jamaica letter, and this basically just put all of his thoughts together on how to unite the Americas and bring in a cohesive Latin kind of harmony and peace that he was so wanting under Latin rule, not under Spanish rule. At one point, while in Kingston, someone tried to assassinate him, and he was able to escape, but definitely not a high moment in his life. He met Alexandre Pétion, and this was the president of Haiti. Again, if I'm saying his name right. And he was willing to provide money and arms in exchange for Bolivar promising to end slavery. So again, slavery was a very common practice in North and South America, though slavery actually was peaked in South America. And he wanted, because Haiti just had its kind of uprising and its short-lived rebellion and democracy, and they wanted slavery to be ended everywhere. So Bolivar promised that if he ever got everything back under control, that slavery would end. And I do believe he kept his promise. The expedition would begin, and Bolivar would be named supreme leader at the Les Cayes Conference. He would land in Venezuela, and the Emancipation Decree and the capture of Carapano and Ocumare. Unfortunately, he is shortly deposed by rival Republican leaders, Marano and Bermudez, and he is forced to return to Haiti. This is actually something that happens in his life multiple times. He is in command, then he has to go into exile. He gains command, has to go into exile. Happens quite often to him. So he eventually would create the Orinoco strategy, shifting the focus to Guyana to build an economic and political base. Because one of his problems was he didn't have that base that he could continually launch from. This is something that makes campaigns much easier and much more successful, is if you have a easy starting point. If you don't, then you're going to be more bound to fail. Bolivar asserted authority by executing a rival general, and this general was Manuel PR, and he did this partly to prevent a racial and political split. Again, there was a lot of different people with a lot of different views, some more on the monarchy, keep the more pure Spaniards in charge, some more on the let's allow equality and merit to win. And so there was a lot of different things going on at this time, and it was very controversial of how everything should go. So in July 1817, Angostura, the city falls, becoming the provisional capital. Eventually, the capital of Venezuela would become Caracas, but like all things, it would bounce around a lot. Jose Antonio Paez and the Llaneros recognized Bolivia's leadership. The Llaneros were the guys under the guy I talked about, that the horsemen that would come in. Bolivar advocated for a British-style centralized government and racial equality. That was, again, something very important to him, especially because of his deal with Haiti, was they needed to end slavery. They needed to have racial equality. This is something that would be fought both in Latin America and then later in North America because of the Civil War. Now that Venezuela was becoming kind of more free, they had more and more places under control, they marched over the Andes, Bolivar and his armies, and they would start the conquest of Gran Colombia. And eventually Gran Colombia would be free, along with many other different places that are now unique countries. So he marched over with 2,000 soldiers. He marched across the Andes, which are incredibly high and very difficult mountains. So this is a feat of its own. And this led to the Battle of Boyacá, which is a decisive victory leading to the liberation of Bogota. Again, some of my Spanish is not so good. So the Decree of Republic of Colombia, this was a formal merger of Venezuela, New Granada, and Quito. And again, this would make Gran Colombia. And it was a short-lived place. It only lasted a short amount of time before it would break up into many of the modern countries. By 1821, we had the Battle of Carabobo, And this was the final liberation of Venezuela. So now Venezuela is fully free and it is an independent nation. A mysterious meeting with Jose de San Martin. San Martin retires, leaving Bolivar as the sole liberator, because up to this point, of course, there was different generals, but now Bolivar is the sole leader and the sole person leading these revolutions. And that was at the Guayaquil Conference, which is a weird conference. Bolivar assumes absolute power to crush the remaining loyalists in Peru, so he is named dictator of Peru. And Sucre wins the Battle of Ayacucho in 1824, and this ends Spanish rule in South America completely. So by 1824, the Spaniards are completely kicked out, and there's now full independent rule of the Latin world. So, a nation named after Bolivar is Bolivia, and this came about in 1825 in honor of all the work that he did. Bolivar's dream of a lifetime presidency would be not fully recognized by this point. In 1825, again, he died in 1830, so he'd only have about 5 more years of life, though again, he would not know that. And there would start becoming cracks in the administration of Gran Colombia because he wanted things one way, and again, a lot of other people wanted things a different way, and his vision would never fully be seen. And this partly leads to some of the conflicts that we see today, that because of this continual conflict, there was never a time when they were willing to come together to cement any form of a central government that would last longer than one lifetime. So enmity would grow between Paez and Bolivar, and this would cause lots of problems. There would be political deadlocks, and this would lead to Bolivar's allies walking out of politics. Bolivar would assume absolute power in 1828, and this was done to try and save the republic. But again, it's kind of ironic, to save a republic, you have to assume absolute power. So you have to become a full monarch to save a republic. So then we have the Septembrin conspiracy. Manuela Sáenz saves Bolivar from assassination. This is the second time now he's almost assassinated. He hides under a bridge to survive the night. And now we're just getting to the last moments of his life. So the dream of Gran Colombia would collapse as different regions would break up. Again, you would have Venezuela, and lots of other different nations would come from these. And in January of 1830, Bolivar would submit his final resignation. He was done with trying to put all the pieces back together. He was becoming a sick and elderly gentleman. And Bolivar would realize the limits of Latin American power projection and his dream for a combined continental power. And again, he would pass away shortly later in December of that same year. So he did not have much more in life. And that ends our short history of Simón Bolivar. Unfortunately, it's not able to go into as much depth in some areas as I would like, but maybe one day I will do a multi-part video discussing more of his life, because Simón Bolivar, again, is someone that I really enjoy studying. He had a very interesting life, a very complicated life, and part of it that makes his life so interesting was the fact that not everything went the way he wanted. So if you enjoy history, especially history that tries to have the life breathed back into it, that is the purpose of my channel, though I'm not always successful. Please like, comment, and kind of follow would also be great. If you watch this later, especially if you get to the end where I'm talking about it now, please put in the comments that what day you watched it and where you're from. I would love to know what places people watch my videos are from. that'd be super awesome. So, all right. Thanks.